You are listening to the Why I Love Disney podcast. In this special quarantine edition, we discuss the Disney classic, Tron. Are you ready? Let's go. Of course. Welcome to a special quarantine edition of the Why I Love Disney podcast. What's up, David?
Hey, Dustin, how you doing?
Ramin, I'm so glad you're here to talk about this today, too. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
All right, we are here, and the whole idea of this is that you're stuck at your house, you're watching Disney Plus, you're not supposed to go anywhere. So David logged 27 to 30 hours of Disney Plus time last week, and we've been killing the Disney Plus. So we thought it would be fun to take these things we're watching and talk about them together. And today, this episode, we're going to talk about the classic Tron, Disney's Tron, from 1982, starring Jeff Bridges and some other people.
Bruce Boxleitner.
Who was his name again?
Bruce Boxleitner.
And who else? Who else is in it?
Cindy Morgan.
Cindy Morgan. Now, do you recognize those names from other movies?
Bruce, I do.
Okay. Because I'm just like, well, Jeff Bridges and the other people. But you know, we don't want to give everybody their due. I mean, Jeff Bridges, the dude, right? And his most recent, actually a really good movie, Hell or High Water. Have you seen that movie?
I haven't seen it.
He's a sheriff in Texas.
Oh, wait, I have seen it.
Oh, dude.
It was killer. It was really
It was
good.
nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah.
Jeff Bridges is like an incredible... Has he won an Academy Award? I should have researched this before.
I don't think
he
so.
should have, had he not. But he's an iconic actor through the decades. And this is kind of... I don't know if he did anything before this, I'm sure he had. He was in his early 30s when this happened. But 1982 Tron, I think he's the most memorable piece of this. He plays a character called Flynn. And so this movie, first of all, let me ask you, had you seen the movie before, David?
I have, but it's been a long time.
Okay, me as well. I'd seen it a long time ago, and remembered very little about it. Just kind of the basis of this plot line. Ramin, had you ever seen the movie before?
I hadn't seen the original one.
Okay.
No.
So you're new to Tron. We watched it again, but haven't been a long time. Did you enjoy it?
I did. I think I enjoyed it more now than I did before.
Okay.
I think I enjoyed looking back. It's very 80s, and it was more nostalgic looking back on it now than when I watched it before. And it was kind of like, it just looked dated. Now it seemed dated, kind of in a good way. Like when you go back when you watch another classic from the 50s or 60s, it looks like it's time.
So you didn't see it kind of when it first came out?
I did.
And you felt it was dated then?
No, when I saw it the first time, I just thought that it was, I was trying to understand it.
Okay.
It probably went over my head a little bit. I did see it again at some point and kind of thought, later on DVD saw it and thought, it feels a little dated. But
yeah, so when I first saw it, I was probably in elementary school. When Disney, you go to rent the videos at the video store, and you get it one time because it looks cool. And I remember one of the thoughts being it was hard to get through for me and hard to understand as a kid.
Right.
And so there's a lot going on. The storyline, everybody's kind of the way they're glowing. It's sometimes hard to differentiate characters.
Yes, and even the light cycles. Like who was that?
Yeah.
Which one was that? The colors. Sometimes it's very hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely.
To tell what's
Even
going
the scenery gets kind of disorienting.
Mm-hmm.
Like you never really quite get a feel for the whole sense of the grid and things there. Like you don't quite understand.
Sure. So I was like you. I rewatching it.
Right.
I really enjoyed it. It was fascinating. I watched it with my kids. They really liked it too. Now,
I did find that really interesting that they stayed with it all the way through.
Now, they had me with them, and there were several times I paused it to explain to them what was happening. So that might have helped a little bit, but they did not lose interest at all, which I thought was interesting. But kind of goes to what we were saying. When we were younger, we kind of had those same sort of thoughts.
Well, when I saw it the first time, I wasn't into games that much.
Yeah.
So there was a lot that I didn't really, just probably the science of it all and the computer jargon. I probably didn't really understand what was really happening. Going, who is that? Is he real or is he a computer character?
Sure.
And even this time watching it, I was a little confused sometimes. Like, do they know that they're computer game? It was still I still have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I even watched it with the audio commentary.
Okay.
To go back through and go, okay, just to hear hear the directors and the writers talk about it, so I could get a better understanding. And that did help.
That's
That did
awesome.
help.
Ramin, did you enjoy it? What did you think?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. It is shorter too. It's only like hour 36 minutes runtime, so pretty quick relatively. And I did enjoy it. It was kind of interesting watching it, having watched Tron Legacy.
You saw that first?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. I had watched that first, and then so going back, it was really interesting to see all the references Legacy pulled from that I didn't know about before, and so I was kind of picking those out as the movie went, which was pretty fun to do. So I liked it a lot.
Awesome. And I think, too, we were talking a little earlier. You said you went back and found some old reviews. What were some of the original reviews like?
Well, Roger Ebert had given it like 4 out of 4 stars.
Okay.
It actually had some really good reviews because, and this is another interesting thing, that in the audio commentary, they talk about at this point in Disney, by 82, it was so difficult to get a headlining star to be in a Disney movie. Now, Splash is going to come in just a couple of years.
Right.
It's going to flip everything around. But at this point, the brand was not seen as, is this something I really want to do? So the fact that they even got Jeff Bridges and these guys was probably a big move. And it actually did pay off creatively because the critics actually give it very good reviews. But I think box office, it still wasn't considered a huge success.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about that. And now that you say the critical reviews, I sort of get that because I felt when you put yourself back and say, okay, it's 1982 when this comes out. The world in 1982, most people did not have personal computers at that point. Actually, I don't think the personal computing industry was just sort of being, I think Steve Jobs was still and Bill Gates were still in their garage at that point.
I think you're a couple of years away. By 84, 85, I think you had
Start to have.
Yeah.
But the idea to people, it still was a novel. Only businesses had computers. They were familiar with computers and again, I say this, I was 3 years old in 1982, so I have no direct frame of reference. I just, I can imagine this comes out and it's so full of technical jargon and things, and it touches on what it's like if you AI. Now our conversation would be around AI and what artificial intelligence, and can you make a program that gets so smart that you can't control it anymore? And there's all sorts of derivatives of that in cinema and on television. But this is kind of the first of that, really, right? So when you say a good critical review, I understand because the story itself was probably where it's kind of done and told many times now was sort of new and novel to the time. And interesting, you mentioned the box office. You can also see how it might have went over the heads of a lot of people.
Well, I think about older adults at that time and the parents of teenagers who were playing these games. It meant video games really meant nothing to a lot of people at that point.
What's interesting, I was just doing some research on 1982. What were out there as far as video games? You were within a decade of Pong. Pong was 72. That's like the first Atari. And as far as arcade games, Pac-Man was 1980. I think 1981.
I think you said 80.
80. And Donkey Kong was 81.
So these games are only 1 or 2 years old.
This is a brand. The whole even arcade, the upright, punch the buttons, move your guy around arcade video game culture was brand new.
I think that even the idea of Flynn's Arcade,
Yeah.
like you would have known about what these things were, but every town still probably did not have something like this. There were a lot of teenagers that still had not played video games at this point.
Yeah, it wasn't till later on. I remember my first experience with video games, probably other than my dad having it in television. I think he had like the cartridge in television game we might have had an Atari when I was a little kid. But I remember going to Pizza Hut after down in a local little town in Florida, and you had the kind of the tabletop Pac-Man game. And then you had the Joust game that was kind of an upright, and that was it. Those are the video games in town. You go to Pizza Hut or the pizza place to play some video games. But yeah, the arcade, to go to a place where there's all these arcades. Now, it didn't take long before Chuck E. Cheese, is there, and very soon after, and you're playing all these games and putting quarters in and that kind of stuff. But I can imagine in '82 that it's just sort of like this whole new concept of computing, of kind of technology, video game culture, all merging. Maybe would the term ahead of its time fit here?
I think so. It's kind of interesting as we talk about that because I remember watching in the movie I was like, this leading software developer goes and starts an arcade. Like, I was like, he kind of fell off the map. But it sounds like maybe that would have been a lot harder to do than I was realizing watching this kind of retroactively, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's an emerging technology? And I just think that part of this makes it interesting to talk about now, 30 years later. We're approaching 30 years later.
Yeah, I found this quote. Let me read you this. Roger Ebert, I don't know if I said it right. It's 4 out of 4 stars, not 4 out of 5 stars. Okay. And it says, a dazzling movie from Disney in which computers have been used to make themselves romantic and glorious. Here's a technological sound and light show that is sensational, brainy, stylish, and fun. So actually, he actually makes comparisons to Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. He said this movie is a machine to dazzle and delight us. So that's pretty big reviews.
Yeah, and you look back too, and it feels nostalgic. It feels super 80s, right? The soundtrack is way digital. All the kind of the graphic design of it is very. You see a lot of this now in pop culture, just kind of this throwback to that sound and that look. And so to see how it was originally done is really kind of fascinating to me, too. But I think get down with that.
I think another interesting thing about this review is that several other movies that we've watched lately, like Apple Dumpling Gang, he only gave like 2 stars and basically says this is Disney doing its normal. Everyone was waiting for Disney to break out and do some new things by the 80s. It really has slowed down. So this was probably a breath of fresh air to a lot of people, especially the critics.
So the story itself, you start talking about these characters. You have the character Alan, who is so you have this company called Incom, and they're this giant behemoth, and Jeff Bridges has correct me if I'm wrong as I'm kind of blurting this out, but Jeff Bridges has who's Flynn right. in the movie, has created this program. And his partner, or was Dillinger his partner?
Dillinger's is the senior executive vice president of Incom.
But at some point, they were partners, right? They were kind of even.
Former coworker.
He came on, as another developer,
less talented, but somehow stole.
He took credit for it, and that's how he's promoted through the ranks, and then eventually makes his way to that. Senior
in fact, in the
position.
little blurb, it said he used the MCP to steal Flynn's work and pass it off as his own.
MCP meaning the Master Control Program, I think is what they talk about. So this is like the brain of the whole thing. And
so early on, they're really even talking about who's the creator, who owns this. I think that in the audio commentary of the movie, it talked about there was this sense back then that the big computer corporations were going to take over everything. Yeah. And so these individual programmers and creators, it's kind of their take on what could happen if everything goes wrong.
That's fascinating. That whole argument of Flynn representing the decentralized, free to everybody internet. And I think Legacy, actually, Tron Legacy, it explores that even more because it's more contextual now. I think that's actually, so the conversation would not just be around computer companies, it would be around Facebook. It would be around all the Googles, the people that are collecting your data, that they control it. But the same conversations exist. Is all the centralized information versus a decentralized platform? And Dillinger and the corporation represents this, we will own it all and we will control, right? And there's very kind of dystopian, Orwellian kind of big brother will know and control all versus the Flynn character who is more freedom, decentralized. I want to say the internet, but it's not the internet. It's the information to where anybody can access it.
They do compare it to the internet in the audio commentary. They do make comparisons to that.
But because even the internet in its early days, there was a big battle of who owns it and who's going to control it, right? And then what we found was it's way better if no one controls it. You can build things on it, and it takes really big minds to kind of think through that, because the old way of thinking, I think, is what they're implying here is that you want to own it and control it for yourself and monetize it. Mm-hmm. Whereas to think bigger is to just give it away and then let people build on the platform. And in 1982, these conversations, those are big conversations to have that have been going on for decades now, but they've been going on my entire life. So I'm not unfamiliar to this, but I can only imagine a regular 30, 40-year-old guy going to see this in 1982, trying to get his what are they even talking about? and I could be wrong, but that's just sort of my take on it. I remember my dad really liked this movie.
Oh,
I remember growing
your
up.
dad's he's always liked tech though, so
Yeah.
that makes sense too. I don't know that my dad would have been a big fan of this. My dad wasn't a big fan of Star Wars. I
Okay.
remember that vividly as a kid when it came out. Like my dad, he loved a lot of things like Close Encounters. He loved, but like the Star Wars, all the characters, the R2D2, C3PO. He thought all that was very childish and geared towards a younger generation.
Interesting. So this master control program kind of takes over. And he's partnering with Dillinger, but at some point in the movie, Dillinger, it becomes apparent that he no longer is controlling the master control program. This master control program is controlling everything, and I think he even blackmails Dillinger because he knows the truth that he had stolen the intellectual property that he hadn't actually created. But what he doesn't, so they break in to the place, and the laser, the Honey I Shrunk the Kids laser, behind him, and he's breaking into the thing, and I don't think he really knows what's about to happen. And this master control program, as a defense mechanism, sucks Flynn into the program, which is manifested in this world of a video game, of some sort. And then and again, it's complex. Like, this isn't a simple thing. And you guys, if you have another take on this, correct me if I'm getting this wrong. But in the context of that video game, it's the master control program working to eliminate his enemy, which is the user, Flynn, that he has sucked in. He's trying to destroy the one person that can undo him. Right. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think so.
And he's doing that through these series of life or death video game situations. But what he doesn't bet on is that this guy is the creator of this program, and is also a pretty dang good video game player himself. And he knows how to, so he finds himself very good at this. And there's this dichotomy of he interacts with the programs within the game, which is the interesting part that gets confusing is they're doppelgangers of the Alan and
Yori
in real life.
Yori is a doppelganger of Lori.
Laura and Alan, and they're doppelgangers in the program.
That was one of the things that confused me.
Tron and Yori.
And that definitely confused me the first time. And even this time I kept trying to figure out, do they know that they're in, or is this Tron, Alan, and are they just played by the same person? And Flynn seems to know he's Flynn, but the others don't seem to know who they are. So I was a little confused by all that.
Yeah, and I think too.
And when she kissed, I thought she was that Laura was with Alan, but then in the game she seems to be attracted and I think kisses Flynn. So I was like, at that point, going, I'm not sure how this parallels.
Yeah, and I think before you get that, you find out that they were actually they had dated at some point, Flynn and Laura, and now she's with Alan, and she brings Alan to find Flynn because they're going to try to break in and do this stuff, right? And so in the game now, my understanding is that Tron, who is the doppelganger of Alan, and Yuri, who is the doppelganger of Laura, they're programmed still. They're just kind of the program essence of these people outside that are still trying to help. So they don't know Flynn, right? Flynn is a user, the actual user who is sucked into the game. So he has all the knowledge of outside in the real world, bringing it into the game. So I think it's putting together that, you're the manifestation of Alan, you're the manifestation, and so all that kind of sticks together. Right. But it is confusing because it's not spelled out for you. And the way they look so, he doesn't have his glasses on.
Right. So sometimes it's hard to tell if that was Flynn or Tron.
You're right. I completely agree.
Because they can look a lot like you can't see their hair. They're just in their face.
The suits.
And unusual lighting. So sometimes it's hard.
It is hard to tell them.
And one of the things in the audio commentary that it also mentioned was that they originally envisioned that Flynn's character would be played by someone younger and a little less athletic and more, typical computer guy. And that Alan's character was going to be played by someone a little bit older. So in the computer realm, you would have seen them different, but they ended up being a lot more alike in real life than they originally intended. So made it a little bit tougher.
Well, I kind of liked Jeff Bridges, like who he was in that film. I actually think that's maybe one of the reasons it worked for me. Right. It was because I want to see this guy. I want to see how he does here because he's got a large aptitude for the games. Like he just seems gifted, talented, and he's that free, like just character. And so I was really ready to see how he just gets unleashed on the grid. And versus, I think if it was a more timid, kind of clumsy guy, at least me personally, I would have been maybe even frustrated with that. I'm like, this guy, come on.
So you even have the added element of that they have to figure out how he's going to get out of this thing. Like what do I do now that I'm here? And that's not apparent at first, right? And as he goes, he communicates out, which is an interesting scene there. And they have like honestly, it kind of reminded me a little bit of like Monty Python, the way the guy looked and the Holy Grail, just sort of that. It wasn't as funny as that, but it was a little bit, I don't know, echoed a little bit of that. There's a little echoes of Star Wars in it too. Right. But he communicates out, gets what he finds out he has to go, to the
master control.
The master control. He has to go make his way to this place, and it's not an easy journey. And there's things out trying to get him, and ultimately it's kind of to escape will also mean that he has to ultimately destroy the master control program or reprogram it or whatever it is. And ultimately, of course, that happens. Right. And he finds himself back out and everything. Dillinger is exposed and everything is back the way it should be. Overall, I thought it was. Again, I thought it moved well. I thought it was fun. I thought it was you don't realize now watching it again the conversations that are sort of all centered around the same conversations we're having now, just in different contexts. But even the whole AI thing, the people like the Elon Musk that are sounding the alarm bells about we should be fearing AI more than anything. Eventually it's going to be the end of the human race as we know it. I probably don't believe that, but the same idea that you find him in this predicament that you don't think he's going to get out of because he's going up against something that I think the master control part even tells him he is now 2,000 times smarter than he was, even and is just training and getting smarter every time. And how are you going to overcome this, right? And so all these are interesting things to talk about and to think about in this. And so
I think one other thing that was a little confusing to me is that the whole time it's called Tron, but he was not necessarily the main character.
Yeah. Right.
So that kind of threw me also.
Was it called Clue?
Yeah, it wasn't, or Flynn, or it was just,
it
was like you would think that the main character's name would have more,
Yeah, even Tron Legacy was that way. Tron was kind of this side character, kind of mysterious in Legacy, like you don't really know him. He's called by a different name even, and you don't find out he's like Tron until a little bit later. Even in the newer one, he played a much bigger role in the original.
Yeah. So anyway, very interesting, and I thought when he died, when Tron died. Sorry if you've not seen it, might want to cut that out. I didn't.
It was made in 1982.
I didn't understand why.
Oh.
I didn't know why it was just suddenly it happened, and then the two of them are alone. So I was a little confused, but that seemed kind of anticlimactic for such a moment. But I thought it was interesting. How long did you say the movie was?
An hour 36 minutes.
Yeah, that's you didn't have 2-hour blockbusters back then, so it probably could have used a few more minutes to explain some things.
I think so too.
It would be different today.
Yeah.
I'm on here researching why it's called Tron, and there's no good answers.
They on the audio commentary they said some people thought I guess there's a term called trace on, and so that was some trace on, trace off. Some people thought it was that. I mean, totally making that up. It was something that's TR on, TR off.
Okay.
And but they said no, it had nothing to do with that. They didn't even know that phrase when they gave him that name. Well, on a scale of how many Mickey stars? What do you normally say? Mouse ears. Once you start that.
It's got to be in proper context, I think. Like, 1982. I'd probably go a 4, a nice 4.0 out of 5.
That might be a few points lower than anything else you've scored.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like super rewatchable to me. I get the significance, and I thought it was way better than I thought it was going to be too. Like
Mhm.
I was surprised how much I liked it again the second time. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna say 4. I have a lot more to think about with it now that you're a little older and have more context.
Mhm.
I found that, watching it as a 10-year-old just didn't resonate with me, but watching it now, I appreciate it a lot more. Those conversations, especially appreciating that at that time they were kind of breaking ground in all of these fields and really having the same conversations we're having right now, just in other contexts. I think it's pretty fascinating, and I thought it just looks so stinking cool. And there is something magical about that time that's so 80s. It's so retro. It wasn't. That was what it was, right? It's probably what we look at as retro now. When we think of the 80s, you can see the kind of the glowing Tron scape, right? You can see those pink grids. You see those what do they call those tank things that they're moving around in those M-shaped tanks.
Mhm.
That's what we think of when we think of the 80s.
Right.
And so in a way, was Tron, this movie, the thing that defined the decade for us? Because even now, we're like, when we draw the 80s, we draw something that looks like that. It sounds like that. It's so I gotta say I'll give it a 4.0 just for I probably could give it a little high, but I got to be fair. And
I think that's a
Yeah.
good score.
yeah.
I think since I've given some other movies we've watched 4s, I'll go just a little bit lower and say maybe like a 3.8. I give it I would definitely give it a 4 on innovation and being ahead of its time and the graphic look of its time, because I know it was so far ahead. I think the story, just the not under being confused about a lot of things about the story, maybe give it maybe a couple of points less. So maybe 3.8.
Yeah, that's
Fair.
where I am.
It's fair.
I think the novelty of it was pretty enjoyable for me. And then again, there's just a lot of confusing like details kind of skipped over, like the laser that digitizes everything. Like what a huge component, and you really just don't get any sense or feel for like that at all. And then of course, yeah, no, I think I probably give it 3.8 as well, somewhere in there.
Awesome. Well, we'd love to know what you think about this. So we love Disney because we have all of this content we can pour into, and it's so fascinating that you get everything from the Apple Dumpling Gang and Old Yeller to something like Tron. And but we'd love to know what you think. So let us know. Contact us at our website, whyilovedisney.com, on Twitter, whyilovedisney1, and we'll be back soon with another quarantine edition where we'll talk about, I don't know, the Parent Trap next. What do you think?
That'll be a great one.
Or the Apple Dumpling Gang, or who knows? Who knows what we'll see next? But until then, we will talk to you soon and hope you stay safe and stay well.
Hey, I've got another question.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any Star Wars overtones as you're watching it? Did you ever feel like Flynn and Tron and Yuri were Han and-
It's so funny you say that. There were there was a moment where it was something in the soundtrack.
I definitely thought that too. There were a few times I thought there were melodies that were not exactly, but just reminiscent.
It felt like John Williams and the Death Star March, kind of like, especially it felt in the darker parts.
Mhm.
Some of the soundtrack felt Star Wars-esque to me, and it actually clicked that in my mind.
Right.
The other thing is, now that you say that, there is a strong. You think of Yuri, Tron, and Clue.
Right.
In the movie, a very Jeff Bridges' character reminds you a lot of
I thought early on, like he reminded me a lot of Han Solo.
Han Solo, and then you get
Just his swagger and
Yeah.
his personality. Yeah.
Tron, maybe a little more Luke, and then you got the Leia character, the Han, Luke, and Leia connection between those two. I could see that. I think it's
And
interesting.
Han's kind of the rebel of the group, and Flynn's kind of that. He's kind of in the, he's outside of the corporate.
Yep,
You know.
absolutely. I think those and again, if you're looking at something to pattern that's been a success in 1982, that's not some bad characters to kind of. And then, again, I think it's vague. It's not like
I don't think it was
overt.
intentional. I just think it was something that was like it kind of. I mean, that would have been like how many? Like 5 years later?
Yeah,
77.
Well, you have
82.
Empire. I think came out in. Let's see, it was 77. 80 and 83.
Right.
So you already had 2 of them out.
Right.
And you had the Harrison Ford Han Solo character, very cavalier, the hair flowing. I think Jeff Bridges definitely gives that vibe, probably more so than the other 2. But I totally see that. But it's not a bad thing. I think most swashbuckling movie.
It's funny though that you picked up on both of those the exact same things that made me think of Star Wars.
Yeah,
was the music and his character, and then suddenly seeing the 3 of them together was like, it's very similar.
And in no way did I think it was like, I didn't think it didn't strike me as, oh, they're ripping Star Wars off.
No.
It was very subtle,
yeah,
but just sort of like just familiarities,
right.
that were there.
I think these are probably like the relative like overtones of like culture at the time, speaking to people and kind of what people generally thought was going to be. I don't know.
Which is exactly what good art should do.
Mm-hmm.
It should take echoes of things that don't feel like a ripoff, and nothing's new.
There are lots of movies where there's 3 characters working things out together. It's just probably was the music